Why did the U.S. Post Office start airmail so early? And more questions from our readers. You've got questions. We've got experts. What made the U.S. Post Office Department decide to start its airmail service so early, before air travel was even common? Aisha Stoll. What made the U.S. Post Office Department decide to start its airmail service so early, before air travel was even common? Francis Dreyfuss, Buffalo, New York. The Postal Service formally introduced its airmail service in 1918. Postmaster General Albert Burleson and Second Assistant Postmaster General Otto Praeger wanted to stimulate investment in aviation, which was still viewed with skepticism. The first commercial airline had opened in 1914 and closed after just 3 months. Through public interest, they hoped to put additional pressure on Congress to fund airmail so they could expand delivery while making it more efficient. A few individual post offices experimented with airmail in the 1910s, but aircraft development didn't really accelerate until World War I. Postal officials turned to the expertise of the U.S. Army and partnered in the first regularly scheduled airmail routes between the major cities of Washington, Philadelphia, and New York, beginning on May 15, 1918. A few months later, the post office took over all aspects of airmail service. Ultimately, the post office wasn't just delivering mail, it was demonstrating that flight could be fast, convenient and transformative for communication, transportation and American life. Allison Basilinsky, Assistant Curator, Smithsonian National Postal Museum. Is there a sex-related difference in life expectancy in mammals other than humans? Stanley Ballou, Cleveland. Many species of mammals have sex-biased life expectancies. Human women live an average of 7.8% longer than men, but for mammals as a whole, females outlive males by 18.6%. This advantage is especially strong in certain species. A female orca can live 50 to 90 years, while males live 30 to 50 years. The average age for a lioness is 15 to 16 years, compared with 8 to 12 years for a lion. Males tend to have larger bodies and greater nutritional demands. Having 2 X chromosomes may also protect females from certain life-shortening mutations. In many species, males also leave their birth group and have to face dangers on their own, including conflict with other males. Melissa Hawkins, Research Zoologist, Mammals, National Museum of Natural History. Why didn't the Allies divide and occupy Italy after World War II as they did with Germany? Alexander Charles Elkins Park, Pennsylvania. There are several reasons. In 1943, the Allies' invasion of Sicily brought the fall of Benito Mussolini and his National Fascist government. Italy signed an armistice, which halted hostilities with the Allies and turned its armed forces over to the Allied powers. Adolf Hitler moved Nazi German forces into northern Italy to prevent the complete loss of the country. The origins of U.S. airmail are deeply tied to innovation, national pride, and a surprising amount of political ambition. When the United States Post Office Department, the predecessor of today's USPS, launched regular airmail service in 1918, powered flight was barely 15 years old. The Wright brothers had flown at Kitty Hawk in 1903, and the world was still trying to understand how airplanes might fit into everyday life. Yet the U.S. government believed aviation could become the backbone of a modern communication network, and there was strategic value in proving America was capable of leading the skies. One of the major reasons for this early move into airmail was speed. Railroads still carried nearly all long-distance mail in the 1910s, but they were vulnerable to bottlenecks, breakdowns, and weather conditions. Transcontinental delivery could take more than a week. Airmail promised delivery in a fraction of the time, if it succeeded. At first, the post office did not even rely on private pilots or private companies, it ran the service itself, flying military surplus biplanes and hiring daring aviators who sometimes navigated only by sight, compass, and rudimentary maps. These pilots flew in open cockpits, often with no radios and minimal instrumentation. Crashes were common in the early years, and the work was dangerous. But every successful flight demonstrated aviation's potential, and by the 1920s the public had begun to trust the skies the same way they trusted rails a generation earlier. Airmail also helped build infrastructure that commercial airlines would later rely on. Before passenger air travel became routine, airmail contracts justified building airfields, beacons, weather observation posts, and flight routes. In fact, some of the first major airlines, such as United, American, and TWA, began as airmail carriers before they ever carried passengers. The government's early investment essentially de-risked the birth of civilian aviation. In this way, the post office was not just delivering letters, it was nurturing an industry. Politically, airmail carried symbolism. The U.S. saw aviation leadership as a matter of national prestige. European countries, especially Britain, France, and Germany, were already building strong aeronautical traditions after World War I. Washington did not want America to fall behind. Backing airmail was a way to tie aviation to the everyday lives of citizens, showing that airplanes were not just military machines or curiosities at airshows, but tools of practical value socially and economically. Early airmail connected regions that otherwise felt remote. Cities like Omaha, Cheyenne, Pueblo, and Salt Lake City were suddenly linked more directly to Washington and New York. This was important long before commercial radio, interstate highways, or reliable long-distance telephony. In a sense, airmail collapsed psychological distance across the country. There was also a business motive. Faster communication meant faster commerce. Contracts could be finalized, legal papers transmitted, and newspaper photographs delivered with unprecedented speed. Daily life began to accelerate, and airmail helped normalize the fast-paced communication culture that would eventually pave the way for telecommunication and digital messaging. Yet the story also reflects risk and controversy. Early critics accused the post office of wasting taxpayer money on a technology not ready for scaling. The crashes in the 1920s raised safety concerns, and there were debates over whether government or private industry should control the skies. By the late 1920s and early 1930s, the airmail system transitioned to private contractors under federal supervision, which helped birth the modern airline industry. In retrospect, the U.S. Post Office started airmail early precisely because it wasn't just serving the mail, it was building the future. The gamble accelerated technology, infrastructure, and public trust. Without airmail, America might have waited much longer to embrace commercial air travel. What looks like a postal decision was really a national experiment in innovation. Today, airmail is so routine that few people stop to think about its origins. But when the first fragile biplanes lifted sacks of letters into the sky, they were carrying more than mail, they were carrying a new vision of connection, speed, and possibility.